Forensic Odontology, Texas, United States of America. He has completed 1973, BS Biology, 1977, DDS, Fellow in Forensic Odontology in 2008, Master's degree in Forensic Science Administration 2012, MSc Biology in 2017, and enrolled and pursuing MBA. He is the Director of Human Identification Lab, Chief Forensic Odontologist, Texas, United States of America. He is having 27 years of general dental practice in Texas. He has supervised forensic identification more than 7,895 descents and more than 350 dental identifications performed in 2004. Many more. 1993, met Carmel David, Maco, Texas, and Delta 1141 airplane crash in 1988, Delta 191 airplane crash in 1985. He is an expert witness of so many incidents. He has credit to many publications and authored with many textbooks. He has attended many forensic continuing educations and co-editor to American Society of Forensic Odontology Manual and editorial reviewer to too many journals. He is a fellow member of American Board of Forensic Sciences, President-elect in 2019, and member of American Board of Forensic Odontology and past president of American Society of Forensic Odontology. He is a visiting clinical professor in Texas and adjunct assistant professor, University of Texas Health Science Center, Texas. He has been credited with many honors and done a military service as well as community services too. And he's speaking on role of bite mark analysis in modern forensic odontology. It's a privilege to welcome you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you inviting me to be part of the program.
A privilege, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Should I share my screen now?
Yes, sir, please. You can.
Yes, yes, yes.
It says it failed to start.
Maybe Rashid, you have to allow the sharing.
Okay, did that do it?
Not yet.
Okay, when I click share, it says.
Yeah, now it's
Yeah.
Oh, did
Oh,
this
yeah,
thing?
yeah.
Okay, okay.
We can see this.
Okay, is that good now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to talk today on bite mark analysis, and I'm not going to talk so much about how to do bite mark analysis, but I'm going to talk about a little bit about the philosophy of why we do it and where we've been and where we're going. First off, I would like to say thank you to the organizing committee and to everyone for having me, allowing me to be here. I really appreciate it very much. And a special thanks, of course, to Emilio. I appreciate all your help and your guidance.
Thank you.
As noted, I've practiced dentistry for over 40 years. I was a general dentist for about 27. I've been in forensics for about 16 years now, full time. I am at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office in Fort Worth, Texas. And I want to just point out these organizations that I belong to. I'm not bragging on this, but I need to point out that the opinions expressed are mine only, and they do not represent the official views of anybody else. In fact, there's probably several of my colleagues who will disagree with what I'm going to present to you today. I will use a lot of slides in my presentation because I do speak English, but I speak Texas English, and I realize it may be difficult to understand me, so I'll use a lot of slides here. I am in Texas. I'm in Fort Worth, Texas, and we are right next door to Dallas. Some of our local flavor is, you may have heard of the Dallas Cowboys football team. They're right near where our office is. We have the Texas Rangers baseball team. I love to go watch baseball. We are in Texas. We have a big Western rodeo every year. We still have people who ride horses down the street. I mean, that's true. But we are a high-tech area. We have a lot of aerospace companies in the area, a lot of computer companies and software. So we do have a lot of scientists besides just the cowboys around here. So the county where I work for Tarrant County. We have about 2.1 million people in our county. But the medical examiner's office where I work is the district office, and we actually have 4 counties in our jurisdiction. So we serve about almost 3.5 million people now. And then we also are the lab for 2 additional medical examiners offices. So we have 6 medical examiners offices that are housed basically in our office. Now, the organization of this in our country is, of course, we have the federal jurisdiction, which is the United States. And then under that, we have the state jurisdiction. Of course, I'm in Texas. And then under the state, we have our counties. That's the lowest subdivision. I'm in Tarrant County. And under the county, we have the various county courts, our district attorney, the sheriff's office, public health, all sorts of services like that. And the medical examiner's office is under the county jurisdiction. In our medical examiner's office, we're a full service forensic lab, and we have a crime lab, we have toxicology, drug chemistry, trace evidence, firearms and tool marks examiners. We have DNA lab, any sort of examination that the law enforcement folks would want done. Just about any examination we can do at our office. We're very fortunate. We do have forensic pathologists, of course, who are the deputy medical examiners. And my lab, the lab that I run, is the human identification lab. And we have 1 forensic odontologist full-time, which is me. We have a forensic anthropologist. I have 2 fingerprint examiners. And we have a field recovery team of folks who go out and collect skeletons mostly. And we have a multiple fatality identification team. We are right next door to DFW, Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. It's one of the busiest airports in the country. Fortunately, we have not had a plane crash in many years, but we have our team ready to go. Our morgue has 9 autopsy stations. 7 of those are in the main morgue, and 2 of those are in the biohazard morgue, and we're getting a lot of use of that right now with our COVID patients. That's where the COVID patients are all examined. Our staff is 6 forensic pathologists, and then we have 1 fellow who is a forensic pathologist in training. In our jurisdiction, we have about 15,000 deaths that are reported every year. And of those, about 2,500 are actually brought into our office for examination. Of those 2,500, about 750 come in as unidentified for various reasons, which most of you are familiar with. They're either a lot of trauma to the face, or they're fire victims that are unrecognizable. They're decomposed. Right now, we're getting a lot of decomposed individuals more than usual, and it's just beginning to turn into summer here in Texas, and it was 95 degrees today. It's been it's between 35 and 40 Celsius, so it's very hot, and our folks decompose pretty quickly. Most of the folks that we have come in are identified by fingerprints. About 5% I identify through their dental records. Our anthropologist identifies about 3%, and about 2% we get with DNA. We do have a few individuals every year that we can identify with their surgical hardware, such as they have knee replacements or hip replacements, and we can usually get serial numbers from that hardware and contact the company and find out who the person is. Or it's very handy when they do have pacemakers. We can interrogate the pacemakers, get a lot of information out of those. As mentioned, some of the memorable incidents from our office are the exhumation of Lee Harvey Oswald in 1981. Lee Harvey Oswald was the person who was accused of assassinating President Kennedy back in 1963. And Lee Harvey is actually buried in Fort Worth, and he was exhumed and examined. And then we've had a couple of plane crashes out at the airport. The Mount Carmel incident was actually from Waco, Texas, and that went all over the world. It was a religious cult outside of Waco where we lost over 80 people in there, and they all came to our office for exam. And we've had a couple of church shootings here recently, which are very sad. As far as the forensic odontologist, we only have about 90 board certified forensic odontologists in the US. We're a very small organization. Most of the odontologists are in full-time dental practice. Most of them just do forensic odontology part-time. There's only 3 or 4 odontologists in the US that are actually employed full-time as forensic odontologists. And I'm very lucky. I'm very, very lucky to be one of those. Now I'm going to go into a little bit of history of bite mark analysis and kind of let you know as how we got to where we are right now in the US with our bite mark issues that we're having. The first known case that was reported in a US legal journal, and that's sort of the official things where we go to look up cases, was actually from Texas, and it was Doyle versus Texas, and it was 1954. And Mr. Doyle broke into a grocery store out in West Texas late one night, and he stole 13 silver dollars. This was, like I said, back in 1954 when we actually still used silver coins. And he stole 13 silver dollars and 2 bottles of whiskey. He was arrested later in the morning at the jail, and whoever it was that had broken into the grocery store had taken a bite out of a large block of cheese, is how it was described. And for some reason, he left the cheese sitting in the store on the counter. And it was found later when the sheriff crime scene went and investigated the break-in. The sheriff found this cheese, and so he had the bright idea of later, he took another piece of cheese to Mr. Doyle in the jail. The cheese was just like the one that they had found, and asked him to bite into the new one, which Mr. Doyle did. For some reason, he agreed to it and just gladly bit into the new piece of cheese. So the sheriff had the cheese from the crime scene and the cheese that Mr. Doyle had bitten into. And these were sent to the Department of Public Safety. And of course, back in 1954, we didn't really have forensic odontologists around. And so they had a firearms and tool mark examiner look at the cheese. And then there was a dentist that they picked from our licensing board and had him look at the 2 pieces of cheese also. And both of the analysts gave opinions that the bite in the exemplar cheese matched the bite in the cheese that Mr. Doyle had made. And so they identified him as the burglar, and he was tried in court, and he was convicted of breaking into the grocery store, and he was sentenced to 2 years in the state penitentiary, which was kind of a harsh sentence for that, but he had 2 prior convictions for cattle rustling or cattle theft. And in Texas, we take cattle theft and horse theft still very seriously. And so this was his 3rd conviction. And so he went to prison for a couple of years for, biting into a piece of cheese. The conviction was appealed, and it was upheld on appeal. And the thing to take away from this case was the bite mark evidence was not challenged at trial or on appeal. It simply just was admitted. It came in, it was never examined as far as how reliable it was or anything. They just said, well, this is a bite mark, and Mr. Doyle did it. And so that was that. The next bite mark case that we had in Texas that went to court was 20 years later in 1974, and this was Patterson. Now, the bite mark evidence in Patterson was challenged at trial as being unreliable. But if you're familiar with the court system, the court followed the precedent, and they simply noted was, we have already admitted similar evidence in Doyle back in 1954. And so the new bite mark evidence came in, even though it was challenged and it was admitted. And this is in our court system, this demonstrates the power of precedent, which in Latin, of course, stare decisis, that means let it stand. And so if there is a prior case that admits bite mark evidence, then the court doesn't have to examine again. They just allow it to come in because it's already been done. The issue about this is the bite in Doyle was on cheese. The bite in Patterson was actually on human skin. And so if the lawyer had thought about it, they probably could have challenged that and distinguished it, and they may have been able to get the bite mark evidence examined as far as the reliability, but they didn't. But these two cases, I think, lead to a lot of the issues that we face now throughout the country in bite mark analysis. Again, with Doyle, the bite mark evidence was simply admitted, and there was no examination of the principles or methods or anything. And then in Patterson, the court followed the established precedent, allowed bite mark evidence to come in again without any examination. And then even though courts in other states don't have to follow Texas' example, most of them did, and they just allowed bite mark evidence to come in without any examination of the theory at all. Many U.S. courts have allowed testimony that people's teeth are as unique as fingerprints, and we have no scientific basis for saying that. And some courts even take judicial notice, which means they don't even have a hearing or anything. They just simply recognize that this statement is true. And of course, as we're finding out now, that certainly may not be true, and we need to examine the science behind it. And from those things, we've gotten a lot of really bad publicity in the US from some of these cases. Jingle Jangle is a book that was written about the Ray Crone case that was out of Arizona. It was a very famous bite mark case in the United States. That was one where Mr. Crone was eventually exonerated by DNA evidence, even though he had been convicted on bite mark evidence. And we've had several of these cases that have come up like this. In fact, the Innocence Project, on their website, they note that there have been at least 28 wrongful bite mark convictions and indictments in the US. And most of these are from back in the 1980s or so, where the evidence was not examined much. And the Innocence Project is a private company. You may have heard of the Innocence Project, but it was founded by two attorneys, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, and they were some of the attorneys who were in the O.J. Simpson trial. O.J. Simpson was the American football player who was tried for murdering his ex-wife and her boyfriend. He was found not guilty at the criminal trial, but he was found liable in a civil trial later on. But Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld started the Innocence Project. And their mission is to, from their website, they say it's to free the staggering number of innocent people who are in jail and reform the system that's responsible for this unjust imprisonment. Now, when I was in law school, I need a disclaimer, I did my pro bono hours for the Innocence Project, and they have a lot of law students across the United States who donate untold thousands of hours to help the Innocence Project investigate cases. And what they have done is they have been able to re-examine old convictions due to changes in the laws that we've had. Many of our states now have laws that permit us to go back and look at old cases and look at the science in old cases if there is new science that was not available at the time of the trial. And so what has happened is a lot of these old bite mark cases are being challenged, and fortunately in many jurisdictions the evidence has been preserved even for 30 or 40 years and is available for DNA testing now. And so in many of these cases, a person has been convicted of some crime based on a bite mark analysis, and 30 years later, they test the evidence for DNA and find out that that was not the person who committed the crime, and then the convict is set free. The Innocence Project has a very clever business plan, because what they do is they represent these people to get them out of jail, and then they will represent the person when they sue the government for a wrongful conviction in a civil suit. And so the Innocence Project has been able to, get many people out of jail, and then they turn around and sue the government and get a large settlement. And the Innocence Project has made millions and millions of dollars off of this. Again, I did my pro bono hours for them. They do, by and large, a good work, but they do have a very interesting business model. When they go to court now, the Innocence Project attorneys challenge everything as junk science. Every scientific examination that we do, they challenge as junk science. That's hair and fiber analysis, eyewitness identification is a big one that there's a lot of problem with. And they've even started challenging fingerprints and DNA analysis problems, and with the methods of doing those. And as you know, DNA analysis is considered to be the gold standard for the rest of forensics, but they're even challenging that. But in particular, they have been very hard on bite mark analysis. And every time there's a case that comes up with a bite mark analysis, they will marshal all sorts of resources and bring in all sorts of experts to re-examine the old bite mark case. And so now when we go to court, the forensic odontology expert opinion is simply not enough. Just our expert opinion alone is not accepted. The odontologist must be able to show that bite mark analysis is relevant and reliable. Now, these are the old common law standards that apply in all common law jurisdictions, and that's in areas of the world where England once ruled are generally under common law. And so relevant and reliable still applies today. And the court is going back and they're beginning to interpret reliable as meaning that it must have a solid scientific basis behind the method that you're using. You must be able to demonstrate the science to your method. And typically for most courts, that means citing the research that's available. And unfortunately for most of you that know, we just don't have a lot of research in bite mark analysis that shows that it's reliable. There's hardly any research in that area. And another troubling thing is the Innocence Project lists 28 different cases. In 26 of those cases, the dentist was known who did the bite mark. And of those 26 cases, 17 different Board of Forensic Odontology diplomates were involved in those cases. And that's in the US. These are the most highly trained and most qualified and most experienced experts in bite mark analysis. And there were 17 of those that were involved in these bad bite mark cases. That's very troubling for us. And so I would respectfully suggest that if your approach to do a bite mark case be very, very careful. Always, always seek a second opinion from a qualified colleague. In the US, we seek second and third opinions from our colleagues routinely now. We never do a bite mark case alone. We always have several people looking at the bite mark case. And certainly, if you don't have much experience in bite mark analysis, get a qualified mentor. Don't try to do it on your own without training because, well, number one, it can get you in trouble, but certainly you don't want to be involved in convicting someone improperly. So again, always get a third opinion from a qualified colleague. Now, why do we care about bite marks in the first place? Why do we even look at these? Well, for one thing, they can show that the biter was with the victim perimortem at around the time of death, because bite marks are transient. They don't last for a real long time where they're visible. And so if a victim has a bite mark on them, it's very likely that the biter was with them around the time of death. And so that can be very useful in criminal investigation. In civil cases, it can be shown that a bite mark caused serious pain and suffering. And if it's in a civil case for money, you know, that might be worth some money to the victim for whatever that's worth. In some cases, it's turned around the other way, and, you know, we can show that the victim actually bit the suspect. Many times we'll have to go to the jail, take photographs of a bite mark injury that's on the suspect because the victim bit them in self-defense. What is probably most useful right now in our situation, in our climate in the US, is the bite mark shows us where to collect DNA. DNA can be helpful at times if we have a situation such as where it's in a family. For example, if we have a child that has a bite mark on them and we swab the area, well, we're probably going to get mom's DNA. We're probably going to get dad's DNA, and that's to be expected because, you know, they're always around the baby. So in a family situation or where we have a husband and wife or a boyfriend and girlfriend, DNA may or may not be very helpful. But in a situation where it's a stranger on stranger situation, the DNA can be very helpful in those situations because it's difficult for the stranger to explain how their DNA got on the other person. So DNA, you know, can be helpful. But to me, I look at things from the defense side as an attorney. Bite mark analysis can still be very useful to exclude a person as the biter. You know, we can argue all we want to about whether we can connect a suspect and a victim through a bite mark. And there's a lot of controversy about that, but I still think that it's very, very possible and very useful to be excluded as the biter. And it may not seem to be that big of a deal to exclude someone, but if you're the person being excluded, that's crucial. That's very important to you. And so I always think about from the defense side, the defense doesn't want to lose bite mark analysis, even though they fight against it so much. They don't want to lose it totally because that can exonerate people from time to time. Now, in 2009, the U.S. National Academy of Science issued a report that was extremely critical of forensic science in the United States. And bite mark analysis in particular, we took a beating in this book. All the pattern matching disciplines, footwear, tire tread analysis, and those type of pattern matching things. But bite mark analysis was really very criticized. Even in this report, they said it can be useful to exclude suspects. And so we do have some backing for that still. Now, when we do a bite mark analysis, one of the fundamental principles, and this is for ID by dental records also, is that everyone's teeth are unique. Well, this may or may not be true. As a dentist, you know, I practiced dentistry for a long time. I think it's true. I think everybody's teeth are unique. but it hasn't been scientifically proven. And it may be one of those things that we can't even really prove with science. The issue is, if we examine everybody's teeth at a microscopic level, I think they are unique. You know, you have the wear patterns and chips and the trauma and things like that, and restorations. And I think everybody's teeth are unique. But we simply can't examine everyone in the world. You know, we can't examine their teeth. We can't examine the teeth of all the people who passed away, you know, in order to determine where everybody's teeth are unique or not. I don't know how to scientifically prove it. We've had mathematical proofs that have looked at it, but it doesn't really account for examining everybody's teeth in the world. I think personally, as coming up as a biologist, you know, that teeth are biological material, same like DNA. Everybody's teeth, I think, are unique. I just don't know if we can prove it or not. And that's one of our fundamental principles. But in bite mark analysis, the real issue is not whether everybody's teeth are unique or not. That's not really our issue in bite mark analysis. So for the sake of argument, you know, we accept the premise that everybody's teeth are unique. Like I said, I think they are. I just don't know how to prove it. But if we say that everyone's teeth are unique, nonetheless, is it still possible for two people to have teeth that are similar enough that they can produce a bite mark that you can't tell from apart? Two people have different sets of teeth and they are unique, but can they make a bite mark where you can't tell which set of teeth made the bite mark? And I think that's true because we have a lot of cases where we look at people that we can't exclude. Do two people have similar enough teeth that you can't tell their bite marks apart when made on human skin? And that is our issue. That is the problem that we have in bite mark analysis, that most of the bite marks are not made in cheese, they're made on human skin. That's our confounding issue. You know, we can take dental stone casts of a suspect teeth and they're extremely accurate. You know, we make crown and bridge cast impressions that are extremely accurate. That's not a problem. Human skin is a very poor impression material, though. It does not make accurate impressions. And so the issue that we're faced with in bite mark analysis, do we have people whose teeth are unique but are indistinguishable from each other? And so that is the critical issue in bite mark analysis. And that's what we have to deal with. Can two people have teeth that are unique, but at the level we are examining them, we can't distinguish them apart? So when we have a bite mark case, there's several questions that the odontologist needs to answer. Okay. The first thing that we're looking at is the injury even a bite mark to begin with? That's our first question. We're looking at some injury on a person. Is it a bite mark? I get called to our morgue. I work in the morgue every day. I get called to the morgue from time to time to look at things like this. Is this a bite mark? Is that a bite mark? You know, and very rarely is it a bite mark. Of course, this is just some sort of bruise. I don't know what it is, but it's not a bite mark. But if the injury is a bite mark, was the bite mark made by a human? That's something that we have to consider. We have people come in all the time with bite marks like this. When you look at this, do you think this is a human bite? Well, it's a dog bite. And we get dog bite cases all the time on deceased people. And you can see the two big marks that were made by the canine teeth. And the thing to remember, if you're looking at a bite mark and thinking about animals, is dogs and cats have 6 incisors instead of 4. And so when you count across the front there, you see 6 little marks that were made by the incisors. They have 6 incisors across the front. And then of course the 2 big canines. This is a dog bite. Dog bites, the arrangement tends to be rather curved like this. Felines, the incisors tend to be in a straight line across the front, of course, much smaller than a dog. But this is not a human bite mark. This is a dog bite mark. Now, if we do determine that the injury is a human bite mark, our question is the bite mark good enough for us to analyze? Because some bite marks are really good. Some bite marks are not very good at all. And this is what we call a smoke ring. This is a bite mark where, unfortunately, this was on a living child. And this, I believe this was a bite mark, but it has been healing for several days. And as you see it, it's beginning to lose, you know, all the detail. And for someone to go in and try to analyze this and connect it to a suspect, I think is probably not a very good idea. This is just not a bite mark that's amenable to analysis. And so that brings us to the crux of the bite mark analysis. If the bite mark is a human bite mark, and if it's good enough to analyze, can we link a suspect to the bite mark? This is a case that I had from our morgue. This was a bite on a baby. And we had one suspect, and this is a plaster model of some teeth. And when everybody looks at that, you know, when we do a bite mark analysis, again, like I said, I'm not going to go into how to do them today, but the issue with the bite mark analysis is we want to somehow see if we can superimpose the teeth of the suspect over the injury and see how well that matches. You know, and I hate to use that word. We don't like to use the word match in forensics anymore because it a lot of issues around that word. But we want to create an overlay some way with Photoshop, or we can do it by tracing. We can use a copy machine, several different ways to make overlays. But we want to compare the suspect's cast to the injury on the victim. In this case, when I show it, now this model has been flipped. The photo's been flipped where the teeth are in the right orientation. When I show this, people look at this and just visually, when you look at it, you say, yeah, that looks pretty good. That's, you know, that may be a match on this. This is a pretty good bite mark case. The only problem is the yellow stone cast is not from the suspect. The stone cast is just from one that I pulled off the shelf in my office. I looked for somebody that had a diastema between the centrals, and I just pulled that model off, and it actually matched the bite pretty well. The image of the teeth is the actual suspect. I went back and did a second opinion on this case. I actually sent it to one of my colleagues. I knew all the background on this case and everything, and so instead of me doing the analysis, we had another colleague do it who didn't know anything about the case and was doing it blinded, as we call it. And so she made very nice overlays. It was a very good match. The problem is the unrelated cast from the top when we made overlays onto the bite was a pretty good match also. And so this brings us back to the question of, can two people have teeth that are similar enough that you can't tell them apart in the bite mark, even though the teeth are unique? And when you look at the cast and look at the living person's teeth, you can see that there are many differences that you can spot easily to a dentist. They're apparent, but are they unique enough that they actually show up in the bite mark? And in this case, they didn't. So that's the thing. This case really hit me as far as doing a bite mark analysis and what we were doing. Because like I said, I just picked the plaster cast at random off the shelf. Again, I just looked for somebody that had diastema and, got a pretty good match. So what I'm asking today, please don't rush to embrace bite mark analysis until we have a good, solid scientific foundation behind it. Okay. Don't use methods that are not science-based. Okay. Again, our expert opinion is no longer enough in court. Simple opinion in courts call it ipse dixit. And that's where the expert comes in and says, this is true because I'm the expert and I say it's true. Well, that's not good enough anymore. We have to be able to prove it. Okay. And we see that in the US at least, that there have been some studies done where even the highly trained and highly qualified diplomats disagree on whether an injury is even a bite mark or not, much less whether it's a human bite mark and can be matched to somebody. We're really in turmoil right now in the US over this issue. And we get things that come into the morgue like this all the time. Again, I'm called to the morgue every day to look at things like this. You know, is this a bite mark? Is this a bite mark? Is this a human bite mark? Some of the things we know are bite marks. Again, this was that same, this was another animal bite mark, but this was a child, a living child that was abused, and he has bite marks all over him. And, you know, you want to be able to help. I want to help this child somehow. I want to help the police. But most of those bite marks are healing and old, and you can't analyze them. Some of them are very good. But no matter how badly you want to help, you have to respect the scientist that's in you, and you have to use methods that are scientific and that are proven, and that in your own heart of hearts, that you believe you know what you're doing and that you know that you're pursuing the truth. You know, some of our cases in the US, we're not sure about the motivation of the odontologist, unfortunately. Sometimes it's not clear as to why they said something was a bite mark that clearly wasn't, and they really knew better. But I won't go in any further in those cases. Again, a lot of these things that are brought in, 2 of these are bite marks, 1 is not. And again, back to that, you know, even highly trained diplomats disagreed on whether an injury is even a bite mark or not. So how can we go to court and testify about that? There is not scientific research on the topic of matching a suspect's teeth to a bite mark injury. And so what I'm asking you is, please learn from our example. Learn from the things that we've done wrong. Learn from the mistakes that we have made, and don't do that. Don't do what we did in using a method that's unproven and untested. Again, in Doyle, the bite mark evidence just came in. Nobody questioned it. And even though I'm from Texas and I've been to law school and I love doing bite mark cases, that wasn't right. That wasn't right the way that was done. So don't do what we did. Please, please help the worldwide forensic odontology community. Do the research. This is what we need. We're crying out for basic science research in the area of bite mark analysis. In the United States, it's very difficult to do this type of analysis. We have institutional review boards. Most universities have those when you're dealing with live patients. And the IRBs in the United States simply will not let us bite living people to see how bite marks are made and how they heal. So we need some analog, some sort of proxy to use instead of humans. And it's very difficult for us in the US to do that type of research. So we're asking, please, please take a worldwide initiative. Let's get the research done. Let's do basic science and research. If we're truly concerned about human rights, please don't send innocent people to prison based on a faulty bite mark analysis. If you haven't done many, get someone to help you who knows what they're doing. Again, don't do it alone. 2 or 3 colleagues look at these. And when we talk about research, there's a number of topics that just come to mind right off the bat. the uniqueness of human dentition, again, has not been proven. Again, I'm not sure if we can prove it. There's been some research in this area, but we could use more research to show that either it is unique or it's not. I'm not sure how to do that, but you know, a lot of you are much smarter than I am, and you can figure something out, I bet. We need some research into the area of human skin as an impression medium. Like I said, in the United States, it's very difficult for us to do this type of research. We have one researcher in Canada who uses anesthetized pigs to make bites on, and that seems to work pretty well. But nonetheless, when you go to court, the first thing the lawyer says is, well, pig skin is not human skin, is it? And it's like, well, no, you know, but it works pretty well. I said, okay, but it's not human skin, is it? It's like, well, no. And so we don't have a good proxy to use for human skin. And we don't know how much distortion there is made when there's a bite. You know, people don't just sit there. A victim doesn't just sit there and let the suspect bite them. It's usually, bite mark cases are usually some sort of a heinous crime, a murder or a sexual assault. You know, they're usually involved in very bad crimes. And so the victim isn't sitting still, you know, being bitten. And so there's a lot of distortion going on. We need to take a look at that. So how good is human skin as an impression material? Well, again, I submit it's not very good. If it was a really good impression material, you know, we'd use it for crown and bridge impressions, and we don't. So we need some research in that area. Basic question: can odontologists reliably identify bite marks? This is a threshold question. And in the US, we've had a couple of studies, or one study where this was brought up, and the results were very controversial and were frankly not good for odontologists. And this is still, this study was done 4 or 5 years ago, and we're still arguing over this. And more to the point, can odontologists reliably link a suspect to a bite mark? And there's a lot of controversy about this, okay? You know, 2 odontologists look at a bite mark. They both agree that it's human bite mark, but one says the suspect did it. The other one says the suspect didn't do it. You know, how reliable is this linkage? Can it be done? I think if the bite is a very good bite, very distinctive, I think we probably can do that, but I can't prove it. When I go to court and talk about it, I can't prove that that's done. And one thing that would be very useful for us, again, a threshold type of question, is can we set up some sort of classification system for the arrangement of teeth? You know, orthodontists describe the arrangement of teeth, pedodontists, you know, describe the arrangement of teeth. But can we describe a classification system for forensic purposes where we can set up a database so we can make valid statistical statements about the arrangement of teeth? Can we say things like the intercanine width here is 35 millimeters, and that occurs in X% of this population? Or we can say the upper right central incisor is rotated 3 degrees, and we know that that occurs in, you know, X% of the population. We don't have anything like that now. It would be similar to what they do in the DNA databases. You know, they have databases of the frequency of the different alleles that they use to examine. It's very, very detailed studies, a lot of data in DNA. We don't have anything like that in odontology, and that can be very useful. So again, be very careful. If you have a bite mark case, don't do it alone. Don't do it in a vacuum. You know, consult your colleagues. Use methods that are scientific based. Help us with an initiative to get research going, you know, all over the world into these different topics. Again, because if we're really concerned about human rights, you know, we don't want to send innocent people to prison. And so with that, I leave that with you, and that's the conclusion of my presentation. Here's my contact information. If anyone has further questions, please feel free to call me or contact me. And that's the end.
Now I request participant, if they have any question, they can raise hand. I will connect them with once I'll announce the name. You just raise hand if you have any question. I'll allow you to ask your question, and Professor Roger will answer your query. All the participants can unmute by themselves once I'll announce their name. Any question? You can raise your hand. Because a reading question, this much question is very tough. Allowing to type the question also, but it's very tough for me to read all the question and ask to Professor Roger. So Satyajit Rajesh sir, you can unmute and ask your question.
Hello, Dr. Roger. I have one question to you. You have said that no two dentitions are equal, and it has not been proved. But the same stands true for fingerprints also, because not all individuals living on the earth have been checked for their fingerprints, and their fingerprints have been compared. So what is the authenticity of use of fingerprints as a unique identification, which it cannot be done with dentition?
Well, that is an issue that, I mean, you're exactly right. And the Innocence Project in the US is challenging fingerprint identification all the time. And as you know, fingerprint identification has been used, we think, very reliably and very successfully for 100 years without any problem.
Okay.
But we don't, and that's something that they're facing in their discipline also, is there's not really a scientific basis behind it. The problem is that the difference is, in fingerprint analysis, there have been very, very few cases where they've had a misidentification. On the other hand, in bite mark analysis, we have a lot of bad bite mark cases in the US right now. And so that's what we call the low hanging fruit. They're picking the low hanging fruit here in the US. It's very easy to pick on bite mark analysis right now. But you're exactly right about fingerprints.
Okay. Thank you.
Professor Emilio.
Yes, Roger, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. It was very, very useful, and also a lesson, really a lectio magistralis, what we call here in Italy, in Latin. So I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask you just an opinion about what is, in your experience, how deep is the influence of an odontologist working in your common law system, considering the differences within our civil law systems when we deal with a bite mark evidence? How much do you think this will influence the work of the expert?
Well, as you know, in the civil law system, the expert is appointed by the court, and they're accepted as an expert. In the United States, under the common law system, under our rules of evidence, the expert has to be qualified every time they go to court. That means they have to undergo an examination by the court to determine if they're qualified to testify or not. And this is every time you go to court. In the past, the court would accept our opinion just because we were a dentist, and they would believe everything that we said. With the Innocence Project, certainly recently challenging everything they have, this is no longer true. And the courts, they're familiar. I mean, the courts across the United States are familiar because, like I said, there's only about 90 of us ABFO dentists in the US, and they know who is a good witness and who's not. But they don't accept our opinions just because we say it anymore. Even the most qualified and the most respected dentists in the US, when they go into court, they have to be able to prove everything. And unfortunately, you know, we don't have a lot of science to use to prove things now. So it's getting to be a big problem. And a lot of prosecutors are not handling bite mark cases anymore. And for example, in my morgue, our chief medical examiner will not let us do bite mark cases anymore. We're not allowed to do bite mark cases at our morgue. And this is an issue because we have, which many jurisdictions do, we are called mandated reporters for child abuse. And even if a child is deceased, it doesn't say anything in the law about the child being deceased. So if I see abuse of a child, I'm supposed to report it, and that includes a bite mark. So you know, it's a problem. It's a big issue right now.
So in Texas, you are not allowed to testify on bite mark evidence anymore in court, I mean?
Well, certainly not in our county. We're not, you know, our medical examiner won't let us. But, you know, the Forensic Science Commission, which I assume that's what you're talking about, it's the Forensic Science Commission. And they, you know, they recommended a moratorium on bite mark cases in Texas. Now, they don't have any authority to order that, but they're a respected body, and that was their suggestion. And a lot of courts have listened to that. And, you know, we're not dealing with a lot of bite mark cases right now. Things are kind of on hold, and we don't know where it's going to go.
Thank you.
Sure.
Dr. Rohan Gowli.
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Rohan.
Hello, Dr. Roja. It was a very nice presentation, quite informative. And in your presentation, in your talk, you mentioned about the Innocence Project. And my question is regarding that. So many times, many people have been awarded millions of dollars of compensation as they were wrongly convicted based on certain forensic evidence, including bite mark. So my question is, does forensic odontologists get, you know, under any professional negligence claim because of this wrongful conviction that happened? This is my question.
Well, we haven't seen so far dentists being sued for professional negligence, for malpractice. Okay, we haven't seen them sued for that, for bite mark analysis. However, there are a number of dentists who have been sued for, under our system, the convicted person who's released, exonerated, they can sue for infringement of their civil rights. And a number of dentists have been sued for that and have lost. You know, the exonerated person won, and there's not a lot of those. There's less than half a dozen of those cases, but what the Innocence Project does is they will sue the state and they will get an award of, you know, millions of dollars for the exonerated person.
Right.
But so far, not a lot of that has come from the dentist. There's been some, but not a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Mr. Goria, sir, I want to ask some questions. Sir.
Thanks for the very nice presentation and the journey of the forensic bite marks from 1954 till date. You just mentioned that skin is not a good substrate, but what is your opinion about the other substrates if you find bite marks? For example, it is on the banana. They are really very, very good bite marks on the banana, and these are on the different food materials. From my research on 200 subjects, I have found that banana is a very good substrate material, and that is a very common food too in all the houses. So what is your opinion about that, about the other substrates other than the skin?
Oh, well, I think, for example, you know, there's been a number of cases where the bite mark was made in cheese, and cheese is a very good substrate. You know, there's a lot of the foodstuffs I think are very good substrates. I think, you know, you can do a pretty good bite mark analysis on that. Unfortunately, in our system, we don't get a lot of those that go to court. It's typically the cases that where the bite is on a person, where they wind up in court.
because from the cheese and the banana, I have found that the bite marks are much better on banana rather than on the cheese. It is almost more than 90% of cases that gives good results, whereas on cheese it has about 40 to 45% in my research work. So I don't know about the other, your experience.
I have to admit, I have no experience with biting into a banana for a bite mark case. I'll have to check that out and see.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Certainly.
Sangram Sandhu want to ask one question. Sangram, you can unmute and ask the question.
Thank you, sir. So it was really informative, the complete session. And I just have one question, like you just explained that bite mark cannot be used as a conclusive evidence. So is there any other biomarker except DNA which we can use for conclusive reports, or like for the identification of the human except the DNA? If we can't say that bite mark is the only option, what the biomarker we can use?
The only other thing that I'm aware of is that we do the enzyme test, salivary amylase. You can swab and test for that because that appears in saliva. And so if you get a positive amylase test that shows that, you know, there was saliva on that area, and if you don't want to use DNA, the amylase, they can do serology on that, which is where they look at the blood groups, but of course that's not very conclusive. And so salivary amylase is the only other one that I'm aware of.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Certainly.
Nivida, you can ask your question.
Hello. So your presentation was really informative. I would like to ask if a bite mark is present on a person's skin, how do you proceed? Do you use the casting method, which is conventional, or do you have any new methods? Can you suggest some?
The methods that we use, which we teach at university, are still, you know, the methods where we take a lot of photographs of the injury. We have a standard protocol that we use for the photographs to make them, you know, where there's the minimal amount of distortion in the photographs. So we take photographs of the injury, and then we take regular impressions of the suspect's teeth and make dental casts of the suspect's teeth, and then use Photoshop to make our overlays from the suspect's teeth to compare to the injury. So that's still how we do it. We have some old timers who still trace the incisal edges of the teeth onto a sheet of clear plastic with a Sharpie, and that works fine too. So but Photoshop with plaster cast is how we teach at the university.
Okay, thank you so much.
Certainly.
Any other participant had the question? You can raise your hand if you have any.
Professor Roger, can you enlighten us with softwares available in the market for bite marks?
For software? Yeah. The main one that we use is Adobe Photoshop. And there's an open source though that I use a lot that's called GIMP, G-I-M-P. Which is very similar to Photoshop, and it's free. I use that one a lot.
No, is there anything that we take the mouse to that bite mark and they do it immediately? Something, the fast method?
I
heard there are some.
Are you referring to the photo documenter, the photo documenter software? Are you familiar with that?
No.
I don't know if that's.
No, I'm not familiar with.
Okay, we have one of the physicians that teaches in our program happens also to be a computer scientist, and he wrote a program called Photo Documenter. He's a pediatrician. He's a pediatric child abuse specialist, and he wrote this program, Photo Documenter, to help him and pediatricians document all the different injuries that children have. It has an excellent comparison program in it where you can, it's much quicker to do a bite mark analysis with the photo documenter. It's a little bit complicated to use. There's a pretty steep learning curve because he wrote it for himself. He didn't really write it for other people to use. So he knows how it works, but nobody else really knows how it works. But when you learn it, it's a very, very good system. So you might look at photo documenter.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Certainly.
Adam, you can ask your question. Adam, you can unmute and ask the question.
Dr. Rogers, sir, thank you for your presentation, sir. And the thing that I want to ask you, you told us about working on a database to create like a database for this dental record, sir. So I'm interested if the Dr. Emilio has also created a database using Selfie Forensic ID app. So could we collaborate that with this to create a bit more like, so we'll get from all around the world the databases. So at least the teeth in the front rows could be analyzed and documented in such a way that we could understand at least that from any bite marks, right, sir?
Yes. Yes.
Manu Smriti, you can ask your question.
Thank you so much for this insightful lecture. So I want to ask that are there any protocols for the image enhancement of bite marks, or we can process them up to our level of satisfaction? Are there any protocols or rules for that?
I don't know. Right now in the United States, I'm on a committee. It's a federal committee where we're trying to, and I'm just one of 50 people on it. I mean, I'm just one of the members on the committee, but we're trying to come up with federal standards and protocols. And we're actually working on things like that, but I don't think any of those protocols have been actually published yet.
Okay, yeah, thank you, sir.
Yes.
So, Dr. Satyajit, do you have another question, or you have completed with your question?
I have another question. I just wanted to clarify what Dr. Neeraj Taneja was asking. I think he was asking of auto tracing of the bite mark when you click on one of the areas of bite mark. I think that was his question.
So,
Taneja?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what the question was now.
Dr. Taneja wanted to ask you if in GIM software, if you click on one point of the bite mark, does it trace automatically the complete boundary of the bite mark? I think that is possible in GIM to some extent, but it is not completely traceable. I have one question for Dr. Roger. Which software do you find more user-friendly when you compare Adobe Photoshop with GIMP?
Adobe Photoshop is probably the more user-friendly. You know, it is difficult to learn GIMP because it's not a commercial product, it's open source. You know, doesn't always have all the documentation and everything, and that's not always as easy to use. So again, with GIMP, there's a learning curve there also. But you know, Adobe Photoshop is expensive and GIMP is free. So
yeah, it is developed by NIH, so it is freely available and everyone can access it.
Right.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the nice presentation and sharing your experience. It was really helpful.
So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ranjit.
Thank you, Dr. Roger, for such a wonderful presentation. Now I request Professor Neeraj Taneja to give the concluding remark. Neeraj, sir. Professor Sunil.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us on one very informative lecture. And definitely we had experienced so many things. And thank you so much once again. And kindly accept our e-certificates, sir, from the organizing committee.
Certainly. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.